we have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. That was President Obama 1 year ago today, exactly 1 year ago today, August 21st, 2012. And, of course, today we have reports of as many as 1,300 killed in a gas attack, a possible chemical attack near Damascus. The opposition making this claim, the Assad regime saying we didn't do anything. And as we speak, the United Nations Security Council in a special meeting has convened to discuss this. Joining us now is a man who used to be involved with that directly, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Hey, sir, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Glad to be with you.
Always my pleasure. Okay, so you heard President Obama a year ago. Nothing has changed since then, or everything has changed. The line kept moving. He's done nothing, and there have been several instances of and accusations of chemical weapons use. What do you make of these latest accusations, and what do you make of the Security Council meeting? What's going to be accomplished there?
Well, certainly the quotation that you just played was one of the low moments of the Obama administration, because when the United States, when the president particularly draws a red line and then ignores it, we pay a cost, because our adversaries around the world look at that and say the United States really doesn't mean it when it says it's serious. We can act with impunity, and I think that's what's happened. In terms of this most recent possible use of chemical weapons, look, I fully believe the Assad regime is capable of it. I believe they've used chemical weapons before. I also believe, I have to say, that if al-Qaeda elements in the opposition got their hands on some of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, that they'd be prepared to use them as well, and to frame Assad while they were at it. I have to say, in this case, Syria negotiated for months and months with the United Nations to keep this inspection team out. They limited their mission. They dragged it out so the trail would go cold. And now, at the very moment this UN inspection team arrives in Syria, it would be an act of utter stupidity for the Syrian government actually to use chemical weapons. When you have the inspectors right there. That's not to say that the Assad regime's not capable of it. They certainly are. But I think we on this particular use, we need more facts. That said, I go back to the point that you started with, and that is that Obama talked about how serious it would be if somebody used chemical weapons, and for 1 year we have done next to nothing other than talk at the United Nations.
And there's really no way that the Security Council could, or anybody, even on the ground, well, maybe on the ground, but, I mean, let me rephrase it. What's the likelihood that they find out if these chemical weapons were used and 1,300 are dead? When or if will they find out who was responsible?
Well, I think it's pretty remote. As I just said, the team that is there now, the UN inspection team, has a very limited mandate, and you can count on the government of Syria, if they did use chemical weapons, not to let them get anywhere near that location. We've also had indications from Russia already that they consider this news of possibly over 1,000 dead as propaganda. So my guess is in the Security Council, even as we speak, the Russians are making sure that nothing really significant happens. I'm sure at the end of the day there'll be a statement issued by the Security Council that condemns the use of chemical weapons, that will say nothing and mean nothing, and that could well be the end of it from the UN perspective.
All right, let's move ahead here and talk about some other breaking news of the day before we get on to Egypt, and that would be the judge sentencing Bradley Manning to 35 years. Now, the prosecution, Mr. Ambassador, had asked for 60 out of the possible 90. The defense wanted no more than 30, and in effect, he's getting 8. Because the 35, he gets time served already, which is about 4, and he only has to serve 1/3 of that sentence. Then he's eligible to get out, and so he might have himself a 7.5, 8-year sentence.
I think it's disgraceful. I think this judge has made a number of rulings during the course of the trial that I think were just absolutely unjustifiable. The harm that Bradley Manning caused is enormous. And this really is, people are now debating what are called mandatory minimum sentences, and those were put into effect some years ago because too many judges gave sentences that were too lenient. And I put this one right up at the top of the heap. I just think this is disgraceful.
What message does it send to future Mannings?
Well, exactly. I mean, this is a slap on the wrist. He's already been in jail for about 3 years. And I'm sure that before the end of the Obama administration, you're going to hear calls to give him a pardon. Now, I will say this: I don't have much good to say about Bradley Manning, but I will say this: he, being in the military, he may have had no choice, but at least he stood trial for what he did. Edward Snowden, the other famous leaker, of course, is hiding out in Russia. He claims he was a whistleblower too. He claims he had higher motives. Well, if he had any guts, he'd come back and do what Bradley Manning did, at least, which was put himself in front of a court and try and defend his actions.
And apologize, by the way, for whatever it's worth.
And Manning apologized. I have to say that, too. That's a good point.
All right, we're talking to Ambassador John Bolton here on the Steve Malzberg Show. All right, you wrote a brilliant piece on the situation in Egypt, appearing in the Wall Street Journal today. Let me ask you, we heard much about, and I can only assume it happened or it's happening, this cabinet meeting that was going to take place at the White House today to further talk about Egyptian aid, U.S. aid to Egypt and the Egyptian military. You're in that room. You're in that cabinet meeting, sir. What do you say to the president?
Well, I would very much oppose cutting off aid, although I think that's the direction the Obama administration is moving. I think the president's been on the side of the scales with the Muslim Brotherhood right from the beginning, right from the time he gave that speech in Egypt, in Cairo, and early 2009 when he insisted that Muslim Brotherhood officials be in the audience, even though it was outlawed in Egypt at the time. I think he's being told by a lot of his advisors that we can't cut the aid off, because we have important security interests there, maintaining the Camp David peace agreement with Israel at the top of the list. So my guess is Obama's going to do what he specializes in, which is that he will dither and he will resort to half measures so that he can't be pinned down one way or the other. But I think Egyptians read this very clearly. They see the Obama administration as being on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood. They attribute it to our ambassador to Egypt, Ann Patterson, and to the president himself. And, this is one of these things where appearance is reality. If people in Egypt think that we support the Brotherhood, they'll react accordingly. And I think that will harm American interest, unfortunately.
And if you're in that cabinet meeting and helping the president not dither or preventing him from dithering too long, and he says to you, he turns to you, he says, and we're playing fantasy here, but he says, tell me about the Muslim Brotherhood. I've heard from John Brennan and others that they're pretty good guys. What would you say in a minute to convince him otherwise?
Well, I think it's critical to understand the Muslim Brotherhood is not a political party as we in the United States understand that term. It's an armed theology. It's a militia group. It doesn't play by normal political rules. When they had control of the Egyptian government under President Mohamed Morsi, they were conducting a creeping coup d'etat against everybody else in Egypt to put in a Sharia law state. And it's one of the reasons why Coptic Christians, Muslim women who don't want to wear the burqa for the rest of their lives have been leading the opposition to the Brotherhood. It's much like the Communist Party in the United States in the sense that Mr. Justice Jackson once called the communists a state within a state. That's what the Brotherhood is. And they're not going to accept the legitimacy of any Egyptian government they don't control. So it's unpleasant. It's certainly unpleasant for Americans. It's more unpleasant for Egyptians. There's a struggle here for who's going to control. Do you have a chance for evolution in the future, or do you have a Muslim Brotherhood-led state forever? And from that perspective, America's interests lie in a secure and stable Egyptian government that upholds the Camp David Accords, keeps the Panama Canal open, and keeps the Sinai from being a highway for terrorists. So I think that points in only one direction, and that's continue military aid and continue to try and use our influence in Egypt.
As you discussed so eloquently in your Wall Street Journal piece, one-word answer, two-word answer. What are the odds that Obama will anytime soon speak about the systematic killing of Christians, the cops in Egypt, the burning of churches, the parading around of Catholic nuns, Christian nuns? It just seems unfathomable that this administration and the media and everyone else isn't up in arms, but nobody is.
Yeah, look, he gives it a very light touch, but barely mentions it, and this is a demonstration of what we have to fear from the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right, fair enough, Mr. Ambassador. John Bolton, senior fellow, by the way, at the American Enterprise Institute, author of Surrender is Not an Option, Defending America at the United Nations and Abroad. Always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you.